Hi, my name is Micah, and I'm a Territory Channel Manager here at Baumer, and today I'd like to show you Smart Reflect technology from Baumer. But before we jump in, let's talk a little bit about photoelectric sensors in general. Now, when we talk about object detection, we're really talking about two main classes of sensors, and that's light barriers and diffuse sensors. So, light barrier sensors typically have an emitter and a receiver, and anything that will pass in between that beam that's being sent between the emitter and receiver that disrupts that is going to cause the sensor to trip its output. And there's also a variant of this type of light barrier sensor that uses a reflector, and it's the same principle. The sensor is going to cast out light here, and it gets a really strong signal back, and anything that comes in between that is going to trip it. Diffuse sensors come in a wide variety of shapes and sizes and types, mainly background suppression and color sensors, or really anything that requires light bouncing down off the object back up to the sensor to detect it. And that's really the main difference between light barriers and diffuse sensors, from a theory standpoint at least. So there are different advantages to these two types of sensors. Light barriers are incredibly reliable sensors that, no matter what the setup is, as long as that reflector and that emitter receiver are really closely aligned, anything that gets in the way of that beam, think like a garage door opener or an elevator where you want just 100% of the time for it to work. It's a great setup. Awesome type of sensor. But diffuse sensors are really cool because they're all self-contained inside here. So all you need is for that light to be able to bounce back up. Super easy to implement onto anything, doesn't take up much space, pretty hassle-free. Now I have here in front of me a diffuse sensor here. It's a fine sensor and it's going to behave exactly like any diffuse sensor should. Anything I say from this point forward about this diffuse sensor, it's not a criticism of the sensor itself. It's just to frame a dialogue around diffuse sensors in general. So this sensor in particular is equipped with background suppression, which means that it's going to ignore everything that's far away and look for basically an object that's close to it, for however far away I set up the parameters on it. Now you can see this in action here. I've already programmed this one here. It's ignoring the table, and as I bring an object closer to it, it's going to reach its trip point right about there, and it's going to pretty reliably be able to do that. Now white is a really easy color for sensors to pick up, especially diffuse sensors, because it's throwing all that light back down there, and white just reflects a bunch of light back up. But let's try it with a black object here. Black reflects a lot less light back up, and as we bring it up, you can see diffuse sensor does a pretty good job. You have to bring it up a little closer to the sensor face because it's not reflecting as much light back. Not a criticism of the sensor, just the way it works. Now, not everything in applications are going to be straight on like this. That's a pretty easy test for the sensor. So if we take this black, which isn't going to reflect as much light back, and we put it at an angle here, you'll see that it starts to become a lot more unreliable in detecting it. And that just goes to show that black objects really just stretch the limits of what a diffuse sensor is designed to do. It's also important to note that all diffuse sensors have a blind spot. So what that basically means is that as you bring an object closer and closer to the face of the sensor, there will be a blind spot on it where it can't see any light being reflected back up. It's not going to get any signal because there's no light bouncing back up. It's just how diffuse sensors kind of work. So let's say you're working in an application where you have to detect a shiny object. See, I have this small mirror here to demonstrate this point. Anything shiny that goes under this diffuse sensor, it's not going to really be able to reliably detect it. And that's not a criticism of the sensor. Again, it's just because there's so much light that's just bouncing off of this mirror that's not able to get enough back to reliably detect it. Now let's take a look at the Baumer Smart Reflect sensor. And now this sensor, it looks like any other Baumer next-gen sensor. It's housed in this O500 housing here, and it's also housed in a smaller O300 size. And they differ only in their size of housing, and in their sensing distance, and in the type of cable that connects them, but not huge differences. This one can see a little farther on its sensing distance. This one has a little bit of a tighter window, but for different applications they work really great. Pretty much the same across the board. Now, like all other Baumer next-gen sensors, this one utilizes what we call QTeach, and what QTeach does is it essentially allows you to program the sensor without any pots or buttons. And we did this because pots or buttons we found can break really easily and really shorten the life of the sensor, but with this, it's meant to last for a really long time, even in the most difficult of applications. So to program the sensor here, all it needs is a focal point down at the bottom of here, and to bring it into teach mode, I recommend taking anything that is metal, so like a screwdriver or an Allen wrench or really anything like that. And if you just flatly lay it on the top of the sensor, you'll bring it into teach mode. You'll see it flashing like this. This is the first of the teaching modes. And so it's looking at the focal point here, and I say I want to teach it to the focal point. So I'm gonna, using one touch, hold it like this. The sensor will flash for a few seconds, and now it's solid. It is in operation mode right now. Now let's see how this sensor operates. Now you can tell right off the bat that it's not a light barrier sensor. It can't be. It doesn't use a reflector. It doesn't use a emitter receiver. To the untrained eye, it looks just like any old diffuse sensor here. So let's see it in action. Let's try it out here. So we'll take a white object, put it underneath. It's a pretty good job detecting it, but that's not that impressive. The diffuse sensor that we showed you before did the same exact thing. So let's try it on black now. We'll bring it under the sensor here. Pretty good job doing it flat. If we bring it here at an angle, even a really steep angle, like almost 90 degrees here, still reliably detects it 100% of the time. Now let's put this sensor to the ultimate test. We'll take a really shiny mirror that's going to take all the light and just reflect it out in a million different directions here. We'll put it underneath here. Wow, it does a really good job detecting it here. Even at a really sharp angle, it still is able to detect the object underneath it 100% of the time, even on a shiny surface like a mirror. And that's really interesting. Now, if you remember, all diffuse sensors have to have a blind spot because they have to have enough light to bounce back off the object and up to the sensor. But if we look at Smart Reflect here, we bring it all the way up to the sensor face, it doesn't seem to have a blind spot. Now that's really interesting. At this point, we've completely departed the world of normal diffuse sensors because Smart Reflect isn't a diffuse sensor. It's in fact a light barrier sensor that can function without the use of a reflector or an emitter receiver. Smart Reflect is an incredibly unique product, and it's only available from Baumer. I hope you've enjoyed this demonstration. If you have any interest or questions about any other Baumer products, please reach out at the number below. We genuinely love talking about sensors. Thanks for watching.